The message came on a Tuesday morning without warning. Every screen on Earth lit up at the same moment. Television broadcasts stopped. Computer monitors flickered. Phone displays changed. Even the massive digital billboards in Times Square showed the same thing. A face appeared that no human had ever seen before. It was tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered between purple and silver like oil on water. The eyes were large and dark and seemed to look through the camera directly at every person watching. The creature spoke in perfect English, though its mouth moved strangely. Admiral Jake Morrison was drinking coffee in the command center of United Earth Defense Headquarters when it happened. He nearly dropped his mug. Around him, dozens of officers and analysts froze at their stations. The alien introduced itself as High Chancellor Vexnar of the Galactic Council. Morrison set down his coffee very carefully and listened. The Chancellor explained that the Council represented 47 advanced civilizations. These species had been watching Earth for some time now. They had been monitoring human progress, and they were not pleased with what they saw. President Lisa Bennett was in the Oval Office when her Chief of Staff, Karen Hughes, burst through the door. The President looked up from her paperwork with raised eyebrows, but Karen just pointed at the television. Bennett turned to see the alien speaking. She stood slowly and walked closer to the screen. Her expression remained calm, but her jaw tightened. Beside her Secretary of Defense, Greg Palmer, appeared in the doorway. He had run from his office 3 floors down. All 3 of them watched in silence as the alien delivered its message. The High Chancellor spoke about humanity's rapid technological advancement. He mentioned the satellites humans had placed in orbit. He talked about the space stations and the mining operations on the moon. He expressed concern about the military vessels humans were building, the defensive weapons humanity had developed, the expansion into the solar system. All of this, the Chancellor said, was happening too fast. It was dangerous. It was aggressive. The Galactic Council had seen this pattern before with other species. It never ended well. Therefore, the Council had made a decision. Morrison felt his blood pressure rising as he listened. Around him, the command center remained dead silent. Everyone was processing the same information. The alien was threatening them. That much was clear. But the specific nature of the threat was still coming. The Chancellor continued speaking in that calm, melodious voice that somehow made everything worse. He explained that for the safety of the galactic community, Earth would need to make some changes. Significant changes, immediately. The ultimatum came next, and it was worse than anyone had imagined. Earth was to surrender its sovereignty within 7 days. All military forces were to be dismantled completely. Every weapon decommissioned. Every warship grounded. Space stations were to be abandoned. Research into advanced technologies was to stop. Earth would become what the Chancellor called a protectorate. This meant the Galactic Council would oversee all human activities. They would monitor everything. They would control what humans could learn and build and explore. It was for humanity's own good, the Chancellor explained. Young species needed guidance. They needed protection from themselves. The transmission ended abruptly. The screens went back to normal programming. For exactly 3 seconds, nobody in the command center moved. Then Lieutenant Amy Foster at the communications desk started laughing. It was a short, sharp bark of disbelief. She clapped a hand over her mouth immediately, but it was too late. The sound had broken the spell. Captain Danny Wright at the tactical station snorted. Then he was laughing too. Within moments, the entire command center erupted. Officers and analysts who dealt with life and death situations every day were doubled over with laughter. Morrison found himself grinning despite the severity of the situation. Karen Hughes, who had appeared on the command center's main screen from the White House, was wiping tears from her eyes. Even President Bennett allowed herself a small smile. Greg Palmer was shaking his head in amazement. The laughter spread through every military installation around the world. From the Pentagon to NORAD to the European Space Command to the Chinese military headquarters. Everywhere humans had heard the message, they were having the same reaction. Disbelief followed by laughter. Morrison walked to the main tactical display. He brought up the current status of Earth's defenses. Orbital platforms glowed green, indicating full operational status. The lunar base showed ready. Mars station reported nominal. The outer system sensors were active. He looked at the network of defenses humanity had built over the past 50 years and shook his head. The alien wanted them to dismantle all of this, wanted them to lie down and surrender, wanted them to become pets. President Bennett's voice came through the speakers. She had composed herself and was addressing every military installation simultaneously. Her tone was firm and controlled. She ordered all personnel to return to their stations. There would be no panic, no rushed decisions. They had 7 days, and they would use every minute of that time wisely. She wanted a full intelligence briefing within the hour. Every agency was to compile everything they knew about aliens, every scrap of data from 50 years of watching the stars. She wanted to know exactly who had just threatened Earth. Morrison turned to his staff. Danny Wright was already pulling up sensor logs. Sarah Blake at Communications was reviewing every strange signal they had ever detected. Lieutenant Ryan Butler was coordinating with intelligence services worldwide. They had 7 days to prepare. 7 days to figure out what humanity was facing. 7 days to decide how to respond. Morrison knew one thing for certain, though. Earth was not going to surrender. Humans had not clawed their way up from caves and survived world wars and nuclear standoffs just to bow down to aliens who thought they knew better. Karen Hughes appeared on screen again. She was in a secure conference room now with advisors crowded around her. She asked Morrison for his assessment. He told her the truth. Earth's defenses were good, better than the aliens probably realized. Humanity had been preparing for this scenario since the first detection of alien signals decades ago. Not openly, not in a way that would be obvious to distant observers, but steadily and with increasing sophistication. Humans were very good at building weapons. It was one of their most reliable talents. They had taken that talent and applied it to space warfare for 50 years. Greg Palmer asked the question everyone was thinking. What if they attacked? What if the 7 days passed and Earth refused and the aliens came anyway? Morrison pulled up projections, showed them the defensive grid, explained the capabilities they had developed, the weapon systems that had been disguised as research stations and communication satellites, the ships that could be mobilized within hours. Palmer nodded slowly. Bennett looked thoughtful. Then she made her decision. Earth would refuse. They would tell the Galactic Council exactly what they could do with their ultimatum, but they would do it properly, with dignity, with a clear message that would leave no doubt about humanity's position. The President ordered Morrison to bring all forces to ready status, quietly, without obvious mobilization that might provoke an early attack. She told Karen to coordinate with world leaders. Every nation needed to be unified on this. She instructed Greg to prepare response scenarios. Then she told them to find someone to deliver Earth's answer. Someone who could look an alien in the eye through a camera and tell them no. Someone who could represent all of humanity in its finest moment of defiance. Someone who could make it clear that Earth bowed to no one. Morrison smiled. He knew exactly the right person for that job. The 7 days passed in a blur of activity that most of Earth's population never saw. While news networks debated the alien message and politicians gave reassuring speeches, the real work happened in secure facilities around the world. Intelligence analysts worked around the clock. Every piece of data collected over 50 years was reviewed and analyzed. Patterns emerged. The Galactic Council was not what it seemed. Commander Ryan Butler presented his findings in a windowless briefing room deep under the Pentagon. Around the table sat the most powerful people on Earth: President Lisa Bennett, Admiral Jake Morrison, Secretary Greg Palmer, Karen Hughes, General Nicole Price, who commanded the Earth Space Force, Dr. Helen Grant, the foremost expert on alien communications. Ryan pulled up holographic displays and began explaining what they had learned. The Galactic Council had been operating for over 3,000 years. They maintained what they called peace among 47 member species. But peace was not exactly the right word. Control was more accurate. Every species that joined the Council did so under the same terms. They surrendered their sovereignty, dismantled their military forces, stopped advancing technologically. They became what the Council called protectorates, but what any human would recognize as subjects. Helen Grant pointed to the data showing technological progression of Council species. Every single one showed the same pattern: rapid advancement up to a certain point, then nothing. Flatlines for centuries. The Council enforced a technological ceiling. They decided what was safe for each species to know. They controlled research. They monitored development. Any species that pushed too hard against these limits received visits from the Council's enforcement fleet. Morrison asked the obvious question. Had any species refused? Ryan's expression darkened. He pulled up historical records that had been pieced together from decades of monitoring alien communications. 7 species had refused the Council's terms over 3,000 years. Not one of them existed anymore. Their homeworlds were barren, their colonies abandoned. Whether the Council had destroyed them or simply waited for them to destroy themselves was unclear. Either way, the message was obvious. You joined the Council or you disappeared. Greg Palmer leaned back in his chair. He looked tired. They all did. So the Council had never been told no by a species that survived. That was the situation. Bennett asked about the enforcement fleet. General Price had been tracking them since the ultimatum. 12 massive ships, each 2 kilometers long. They were positioned at the edge of the solar system. Just sitting there, waiting. Price pulled up detailed scans. The ships were impressive. Advanced shielding, powerful weapons, sophisticated sensors. They represented technology centuries beyond what the Council thought Earth possessed. But here was the interesting part. Price highlighted several aspects of the Council ships that her analysts had identified. The designs were old, very old, possibly thousands of years old with only minor updates. The tactical formations they used were taken from standard military doctrine. Textbook maneuvers. Nothing creative or adaptive. These were ships that had never fought a real war. They enforced compliance against unarmed populations. They had no experience with actual combat. Morrison smiled at that. Earth, on the other hand, had plenty of experience with combat. Humans had been fighting each other for their entire history. World wars, regional conflicts, civil wars, revolutions. Humans knew war in ways these aliens had forgotten, and for the past 50 years since detecting the first alien signals, humans had been preparing, not for peace. For this exact scenario, Helen explained what humanity had done. It started with fear. When the first alien transmission was detected, governments panicked quietly. If aliens existed and had the technology to send signals across space, they were probably more advanced than humans. Probably dangerous. Probably a threat. So Earth prepared. Not openly because that might attract attention, but steadily. Defense budgets increased. Research accelerated. Space infrastructure expanded, all of it disguised as peaceful exploration and scientific research. The orbital platforms that looked like communication satellites were actually weapons platforms. The space station that appeared to be for research could deploy fighters. The mining operation on the moon had railguns built into the excavation equipment. The sensors scattered through the solar system that were supposedly watching for asteroids were actually watching for aliens. 50 years of quiet preparation, 50 years of humans doing what they did best, building weapons and getting ready for a fight. Karen Hughes asked about the response. President Bennett had decided Earth would refuse the ultimatum. That much was certain, but how to deliver that refusal was important. It needed to be clear, unambiguous, memorable. It needed to represent all of humanity, every nation, every culture, every person on Earth united in defiance. Morrison had suggested someone for the job, a young lieutenant named Casey Moore. Casey was brought into the briefing. He looked nervous, which was understandable. He was 26 years old, a communications officer with a background in theater and debate. He had a talent for staying calm under pressure and delivering lines with perfect timing. Morrison had watched him handle crisis communications during emergencies. The kid never flinched, never stumbled. He could look into a camera and make you believe every word he said. That was exactly what Earth needed now. Bennett explained what she wanted. A message to the Galactic Council. Short, simple, firm. Casey would be the face of humanity, the voice that told an ancient alien empire that Earth would not surrender. No speeches, no long explanations, just a clear statement of fact. The president showed Casey the script they had prepared. He read it over twice. Then he looked up and grinned. He asked if they were really doing this, really telling aliens to leave or else. Bennett confirmed they were. Casey's grin widened. He said he had been rehearsing this his whole life without knowing it. The recording was scheduled for day 7, the exact deadline the council had given. Earth would respond at the last possible moment. Not out of fear, but to show they had taken the threat seriously enough to consider it, and rejected it completely. The setup was carefully designed. Casey would sit at a desk in a standard military uniform. Nothing fancy. Nothing theatrical. Behind him would be an Earth flag. On the desk, a coffee mug. Humanity at its most casual and unbothered. The 6 days before the response were used to position forces. General Price moved her fleet with extreme care. The Council was watching. Their sensors were good, but not good enough to see everything. Human ships moved using trajectories that looked like routine patrols. Orbital platforms that had been dormant came online one system at a time. Never all at once. Never in a way that would seem like mobilization, just normal operations, maintenance cycles, crew rotations. By day 7, Earth's entire defensive network was active and ready. The Council fleet at the solar system's edge had no idea. Day 7 arrived. Casey Moore sat at the desk in the recording studio. Around him, technicians made final adjustments to cameras and lighting. Morrison stood to the side watching. Bennett was present via video link. Karen and Greg and Nicole and Helen all watching from various locations. This would be broadcast on every channel, sent to the Council fleet, transmitted to every alien communication frequency humans had ever detected. It would be humanity's first official message to the wider galaxy, their introduction to galactic civilization, and it would be one word. No, the recording started. Casey looked directly into the camera. His expression was professionally pleasant. Not hostile, not friendly, just calm and matter-of-fact. He greeted the High Chancellor by name, thanked the Council for their message regarding Earth's mandatory capitulation, said that after careful consideration and extensive deliberation, Earth had prepared its response. Then he delivered it. No, just that, no. Earth declined to surrender. Furthermore, the Council fleet was now in violation of Earth's sovereign space. They had 24 hours to leave the solar system. Failure to comply would be considered an act of war. Earth would respond accordingly. Have a nice day. Casey picked up his coffee mug, took a casual sip, smiled slightly. The recording ended. Morrison started laughing first. Then everyone else joined in. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. Calm, polite, completely unbothered, and utterly defiant. The message was transmitted immediately, sent to the Council fleet, broadcast to Earth, posted on every social media platform. Humanity's answer to an ancient alien empire was delivered by a 26-year-old with a coffee mug, and it was glorious. On the Council flagship, High Chancellor Vexnar watched the transmission 3 times. He could not believe what he was seeing. They had refused, actually refused, and threatened him. Threatened the Galactic Council. A species that did not even have faster-than-light travel had just told the Council to leave or face consequences. His military advisor, Commander Zelthar, stood nearby looking equally stunned. In 3,000 years, this had never happened. Vexnar's shock turned to anger. How dare they? How dare these primitive humans reject the Council's generous offer of protection? Did they not understand what they were facing? The Council had maintained order in the galaxy for millennia. They had prevented countless wars, saved species from destroying themselves, and Earth rejected this. Rejected. The Council fleet moved into Earth's outer orbital zone exactly 26 hours after receiving humanity's response. 12 motherships advanced in perfect formation. Each vessel was massive and intimidating with weapons that could level cities. They had done this before, shown up to intimidate a defiant species into submission. It always worked. Species saw the fleet and realized how outmatched they were. They surrendered quickly after that. High Chancellor Vexnar expected the same result here. Humans would see the fleet approaching and panic. They would beg for mercy. He would grant it eventually, but only after making them suffer enough to serve as a lesson. Aboard the ESS Defiance, Admiral Jake Morrison watched the approaching ships with calm interest. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly at their stations. No panic, no fear, just professionals doing their jobs. Morrison had been in combat before, real combat against human opponents who knew how to fight. This felt different, but not in a bad way. These aliens thought they were overwhelming. They had no idea what they were actually facing. Captain Danny Wright monitored the tactical displays. He called out updates as the Council fleet advanced. Distance closing, weapons charging on enemy vessels, their shields coming online, formation holding tight. Everything was by the book. Standard military procedure for intimidation and assault. Danny had studied every battle in human history. He knew what predictable enemies did. They followed doctrine. They relied on superiority. They never adapted until it was too late. Lieutenant Sarah Blake handled communications. She was linked to every defensive platform in the solar system. Lunar batteries reported ready. Mars station confirmed green status. The orbital grid was active. Thousands of platforms that the Council had dismissed as primitive infrastructure were actually weapons, each one tied into a network that had been designed and tested and refined for decades. Sarah's console showed green across the board. Everything was ready. They were just waiting for Morrison's order. The Admiral asked about the outer grid, the one the Council did not know about. Sarah confirmed it was active and waiting. Those platforms had been positioned over years, disguised as space debris, old satellites, decommissioned equipment. Some had been placed 20 years ago and had been sitting dormant ever since, just waiting for this exact moment. The Council's sensors had passed right over them. Never suspected a thing. That was the advantage of being underestimated. The enemy did not look closely enough. On the Council flagship, Commander Zelthar confirmed they were in position. All 12 motherships were ready to fire. Target locks were established on major military installations across Earth. The demonstration would be devastating. One shot across their primary command center in North America. That should be enough to make the point. If not, they would continue until the humans broke. Vexnar gave the order. Fire a warning shot. Show them what they were facing. The flagship's main cannon charged. It was a weapon designed to crack planetary shields, powerful enough to destroy a mountain range. The kind of weapon that ended resistance before it could begin. The beam lanced out toward Earth, bright and terrible. It crossed the distance in seconds and struck the military complex in Nevada. Then something impossible happened. The beam dissipated, just vanished against a shimmering barrier that suddenly became visible. A shield, covering not just the military base but extending in a massive dome over the entire continent. Morrison allowed himself a small smile. Earth had planetary shields, not just defensive platforms or point defense. Actual planetary shields that could absorb weapons fire that should have been centuries beyond their capability. The aliens were learning their first lesson. Never assume you know what your enemy has. Helen Grant had led the research team that developed the shields. She had reverse-engineered the technology from 50 years of studying alien transmissions, found the patterns, figured out the physics, built prototypes, scaled them up. It had taken decades, but now Earth had defenses that matched or exceeded anything the Council possessed. Zelthar stared at his sensors in disbelief. He ran the data 3 times. Planetary shields. That was Tier 3 defensive technology. Their long-range scans had shown Earth at Tier 1. Barely beginning space exploration. Primitive weapons. No advanced defenses. The scans had been wrong. Very wrong. He reported this to Vexnar, who ordered an immediate recalibration. Then ordered the entire fleet to fire, full power. If the humans had shields, they would break them. Show them that resistance was futile. All 12 motherships opened fire simultaneously. Dozens of weapons, energy beams, plasma torpedoes, kinetic missiles. Everything the Council had. The barrage lit up space like a small sun. All of it aimed at Earth. All of it meant to overwhelm any defense and demonstrate absolute superiority. The weapons crossed the distance and struck the planetary shields. Every single shot dissipated, the shields held without even flickering. Earth had not just matched Council technology. They had exceeded it. Morrison opened a communication channel. His face appeared on every Council ship's view screen. He sat comfortably in his command chair, calm, unbothered. Behind him, the bridge crew worked quietly. Everything about the image projected confidence. Morrison greeted the Chancellor politely, thanked him for the demonstration, then explained that by opening fire, the Council had committed an act of war. Earth had given them 24 hours to leave peacefully. The Council had chosen violence instead. That was their second mistake. Their first mistake was assuming Earth would be easy prey. Vexnar felt rage building. This human was mocking him, mocking the Council. He responded with threats. Their shields would not hold forever. The Council had enough firepower to reduce Earth to dust. They had destroyed species before. They would do it again. Morrison's smile widened at that. He said that was the Council's problem right there. They were fighting yesterday's humanity, the species that might have been intimidated by displays of force. But that was not today's humanity. Today's humans were different. Allow me to introduce you, Morrison said. Then he gave Danny the order. Activate the outer grid. Throughout the solar system, thousands of hidden platforms came online all at once. Weapons that had been disguised and dormant suddenly lit up Council sensors. Each platform locked onto a target. The Council fleet was surrounded, completely surrounded by weapons they had never detected. Zelthar's tactical display went red with threat warnings, thousands of them, from every direction, above, below, port, starboard. They were in a kill box and had not even known it. Morrison explained while the Council processed this new reality. He told them this was what happened when you threatened a species that had spent 10,000 years trying to kill each other. Humans were very good at war. They had practiced constantly, refined their skills through countless conflicts. Then 50 years ago they figured out something important. It was more effective to work together. So they did. They unified, pooled their knowledge, combined their weapons technology, and prepared for exactly this scenario. An alien threat, an overwhelming force, a demand for surrender. Earth had been ready for this since before most of the current Council members were born. Morrison gave the order to fire. The outer grid lit up. Thousands of weapons platforms opened up simultaneously. Railguns firing tungsten rods at relativistic speeds. Missile pods launching swarms of smart munitions. Laser batteries creating a web of coherent light. All of it targeting the Council fleet from every angle. The space around the 12 motherships became a storm of destructive force. Their shields came up immediately. The Council had good defensive technology, but they had designed it to fight enemies at their own technological level. Enemies who fought according to established rules. Humanity did neither. Danny coordinated the attack with precision that would have made any conductor proud. He called out targets and weapon assignments. Railgun platforms focused on the lead mothership's shield generators. Laser batteries swept away the fighter screen that the Council was trying to deploy. Missile pods prepared for volley fire. Everything was timed, coordinated, overwhelming. This was not a duel between honorable opponents. This was a pack of wolves taking down a bear. Sarah reported that the Council shields were adapting, learning to deflect the energy weapons. Morrison had expected that. Council technology was sophisticated. Their shields could adjust to different frequencies and types of energy weapons. That was why Earth had not relied solely on energy weapons. Danny switched tactics. Railguns shifted to full assault. Tungsten rods accelerated to incredible speeds. Pure kinetic force. No frequency to adapt to. No energy to deflect. Just mass times velocity equals destruction. The Council shields buckled. They were designed to handle energy weapons, not kinetic impactors moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The physics were simple and brutal. The rods punched through shields that should have been impenetrable, struck armor that should have been invincible. The lead mothership's shield generators exploded. Secondary explosions rippled through its hull. Zelthar watched in horror as his flagship began to fail. Systems going offline. Hull breaches on multiple decks. Casualty reports flooding in. This was not supposed to happen. The Council fleet had never faced serious opposition, never taken real damage. They were peacekeepers, not warriors. General Nicole Price C. The Council delegation arrived aboard the ESS Defiance 3 hours after their fleet was disabled. They came in a small shuttle under a white flag that humans had transmitted to them. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. An ancient human symbol of surrender now being used by aliens who had never surrendered to anyone. High Chancellor Vexinar looked diminished as he walked through the airlock. His iridescent skin had dulled to flat gray. Behind him came Commander Zelthar and 3 other Council officials. All of them moved like they were walking to their execution. Admiral Jake Morrison met them in the docking bay with an honor guard, not to intimidate but to show respect. Earth had won the battle, but this was not about humiliation. It was about establishing a new relationship. Morrison greeted Vexinar formally, offered his hand in the human custom. The Chancellor hesitated, then took it. His hand was cold and his grip weak. Morrison guided them through the ship toward the conference room. Along the way, the Council delegation saw human crew members working calmly. No celebration, no gloating, just people doing their jobs. It was somehow more intimidating than any show of force. The conference room overlooked Earth. The planet hung in the viewport, beautiful and blue and completely unharmed despite the Council's attack. President Lisa Bennett was already there. So were General Nicole Price and Secretary Greg Palmer. Dr. Helen Grant sat at the table with data displays ready. Karen Hughes appeared via video link. The humans stood as the aliens entered. Bennett gestured to seats across the table. The formality of it was deliberate. This was a negotiation between equals. not victors dictating terms to the defeated. Vexnar sat slowly. He looked at Earth through the viewport for a long moment. Then he spoke. His voice was tired. He said this was unprecedented. In 3,000 years of Council history, no species had ever defeated their peacekeeping forces. Morrison responded that perhaps the Council needed to reconsider what peacekeeping meant. You cannot keep peace by enforcing submission. That is not peace. That is control. Vexnar flinched at the words but did not argue. He knew the human was right. President Bennett took control of the conversation. She began by acknowledging that Earth had won this battle. Their technological capabilities had surprised the Council. Their military effectiveness had been overwhelming. But she said this was not about conquest. Earth had no interest in destroying the Council or ruling other species. What Earth wanted was simple: freedom, the right to chart their own course, the ability to advance and explore and grow without artificial limits imposed by others. That was what they had fought for. That was what they would always fight for. Helen Grant pulled up displays showing the Council's history. 47 species integrated as protectorates over 3 millennia. She showed the technological progression charts. Every species stopped advancing at the same point, frozen at whatever level the Council deemed safe. Some had been stagnant for centuries. Helen explained that from Earth's perspective, this was not protection. It was oppression. Well-meaning perhaps, but oppression nonetheless. The Council had decided they knew what was best for everyone, and enforced that decision through military might. That was not civilization. That was tyranny. Zelthar tried to object. He said the Council maintained order. Without their guidance, species developed dangerous technologies. They waged wars. They destroyed themselves. The Council had saved countless lives by preventing such catastrophes. Greg Palmer responded to that. He acknowledged that Earth had nearly destroyed itself multiple times. Nuclear weapons, environmental collapse, biological warfare. Humanity had come close to extinction more than once. But the key word was almost: humans learned. They adapted. They made mistakes and fixed them. That process was essential. You could not protect species by preventing them from growing. You just created eternal children who never learned to stand on their own. Bennett laid out Earth's position. The Council would release their 12 ships, return them without weapons. Vexnar could go back to the Council and deliver a message. Earth would not accept protectorate status, would not surrender sovereignty, would not stop advancing. If the Council chose to attack again, Earth would defend itself. Next time, they would not be as gentle. The word gentle made Zelthar laugh bitterly. They had crippled an entire fleet. What would not gentle look like? Morrison answered honestly. Complete destruction. This had been a demonstration. A message. The next time would be war, but Bennett continued. Earth was not interested in war. What they wanted was partnership. Real partnership between equals. If the Council could accept that, then diplomatic relations were possible. Beneficial even. Earth had technologies the Council lacked. Defensive innovations, weapon systems, shield designs. Humans were willing to share some of this knowledge. Not all of it, but enough to help the Council defend against real threats. Because despite everything, Earth understood what the Council was trying to do. They were trying to prevent catastrophe, trying to maintain stability. The goal was admirable. The methods were flawed. Helen explained the human perspective. The Council had confused safety with stagnation. They had built a system designed to prevent war by preventing change. But that only worked until something came along that the system could not handle. Like humans, Earth had shown that determined species with the right motivation could advance beyond the Council's technological ceiling, could defeat forces meant to be overwhelming. If humans could do it, others could too. The Council's system was not sustainable. It would eventually fail catastrophically when they encountered an enemy they could not intimidate. What Earth proposed was different. A true federation instead of a hierarchy, species joining voluntarily as equals, sharing technology and resources, working together against common threats, but each species maintaining sovereignty, making their own choices, learning from their own mistakes. It would be messier than the Council's system, more chaotic, but it would also be stronger, more adaptable, more innovative. That was what humanity offered. Not conquest, but cooperation. Vexnar listened to all of this in silence. Then he asked about the other protectorate species. The 47 civilizations currently under Council control. What did Earth intend regarding them? Bennett answered carefully. Earth intended to offer them information, to let them know that the Council's control could be challenged. That independence was possible. What those species did with that information was their choice. Earth would not force anyone to rebel, would not demand they reject the Council. But they deserved to know they had options. That was what freedom meant. Choice. Brandon Cole entered the room carrying a secure data module. He presented it to Vexnar formally. The Chancellor took it with trembling hands. Cole explained what it contained. Schematics for some of Earth's defensive technologies. Shield designs, weapon configurations. Not everything, but enough to significantly upgrade Council defenses. Also included was a draft treaty. Terms for mutual defense. Protocols for diplomatic relations. A framework for genuine alliance between Earth and the Council. Not as overlord and subject, but as partners. Vexnar stared at the module. He asked why. Why would humans share their technology after the Council had attacked them? Why offer alliance to enemies? Morrison answered that one. Because humans had learned hard lessons about making enemies. Earth's history was full of conflicts that could have been avoided. Wars fought over misunderstandings. Destruction caused by pride and fear. Humanity had finally figured out that it was better to make friends than enemies. Better to build bridges than walls. The Council had attacked because they were afraid. Afraid of what humanity represented. Afraid of change. Earth understood that fear. They were offering a chance to move past it. The negotiations continued for 3 days. The Council delegation consulted with their government via quantum communications. Debates raged in the Council chambers. Some members wanted to return with a larger fleet, wanted to crush Earth completely. Others recognized that might no longer be possible. That humans had proven themselves too dangerous to fight. The moderates eventually won. Barely. A new approach would be tried. Not because the Council wanted to, but because they had no other choice. Humanity had forced their hand. The treaty that emerged was unprecedented in galactic history. Earth would remain fully independent and sovereign. In exchange, humanity agreed to share certain defensive technologies. Not weapons that could be used for aggression, but shields and detection systems that would help against genuine threats. Earth would also participate in Council discussions as a full member. Equal voting rights. Equal voice. Not a protectorate, a partner. The treaty also established something new. The right of voluntary association. Any protectorate species could petition for review of their status, could negotiate new terms, could potentially gain independence if they demonstrated the capability to maintain it. President Bennett signed the treaty in a ceremony broadcast across human space and to the Council worlds. Vexnar signed for the Council. His hand was steadier now. 3 days of negotiations had shown him that humans were serious about partnership, that they genuinely wanted cooperation, not domination. It was a strange feeling. The Council had maintained order for 3 millennia through control. Now they would try something different, cooperation. It was terrifying, and news of the treaty spread through Council space faster than anyone expected. 47 protectorate species learned simultaneously that Earth had done the impossible. Refused the Council's ultimatum, fought their enforcement fleet, won, and then negotiated as equals. For civilizations that had accepted subjugation as inevitable, it was revolutionary. Within days, the first petition arrived. The Velnar species formally requested review of their protectorate status. They wanted to negotiate new terms. Within a week, 6 more species had submitted similar requests. The Council chambers erupted in chaos. Conservative members argued this was exactly what they had feared. That allowing Earth independence would destabilize the entire system. That other species would follow humanity's example. They had been right, but perhaps not in the way they thought. The moderate faction pointed out that the species petitioning for review were doing so peacefully, using the legal framework the treaty established. Not rebelling, not building weapons, just asking for reconsideration. That was what civilization looked like. Dialogue, not domination. Admiral Jake Morrison watched these developments from Earth with satisfaction. He stood in the observation deck of the ESS Defiance, which had been upgraded and reassigned. No longer just defending Earth's space, the ship now served as humanity's contribution to what was being called the Galactic Defense Initiative, a joint force of Council and independent species working together Morrison's crew included humans and 3 different alien species. The integration had been challenging but successful. Turned out people were people regardless of how many legs they had or what color their skin was. Lieutenant Sarah Blake had been promoted to full communications officer for the Joint Fleet. She coordinated between species whose languages were completely different. Translation systems helped, but there was an art to making sure everyone understood not just the words but the meaning. Sarah had discovered she was good at this. Reading context, understanding cultural nuances, making sure that when a human said something meant as humor, it did not come across as an insult to species without similar concepts. It was exhausting work, but she loved it. On Earth, President Lisa Bennett prepared for the first Galactic Assembly. It would be held on a neutral station the Council had built specifically for this purpose. Every member species would send representatives, including the 7 protectorate species that had successfully negotiated independence over the past year. Earth would participate as both a member and as an advocate for reform. Bennett had chosen her delegation carefully. Karen Hughes as Chief of Staff, Greg Palmer for security matters, Dr. Helen Grant as cultural advisor, and Casey Moore, the young lieutenant who had delivered Earth's refusal. Casey had become something of a celebrity, the human who told aliens no. He handled it with the same casual confidence he had shown in that original transmission. The first session of the Galactic Assembly was historic. Representatives from over 50 species gathered in a massive chamber designed to accommodate different environmental needs. Oxygen breathers in one section, methane breathers in sealed environments, species that existed as energy patterns in contained fields. Humanity took its place among them. Not special, not superior, just another voice in the conversation. That was what they had fought for. The right to participate, to have a say in their own destiny. High Chancellor Vexnar opened the assembly with a speech that acknowledged the changes sweeping through council space. He spoke of tradition and the importance of stability, but he also spoke of growth and adaptation, of learning from those who challenged the established order. He looked directly at the human delegation when he said this. Bennett nodded in acknowledgement. Vexnar had come far from the arrogant leader who had demanded Earth's surrender. He was learning. They all were. The debates that followed were intense. Conservative council members pushed back against every reform proposal. They argued that the old system had maintained peace for millennia, that changing it risked chaos. Progressive members countered that peace maintained through force was not true peace. That stagnation was not the same as stability. The 7 newly independent species spoke eloquently about what freedom meant to them, about the innovations they had achieved in just 1 year without council restrictions, about the possibilities now open to their people. General Nicole Price addressed the assembly on the topic of defense. She explained Earth's philosophy, that the best defense was not weapons but cooperation. That species working together were stronger than any single empire. That diversity of thought and approach made everyone more resilient. She shared tactical data, showing how human swarm tactics could complement council formation fighting, how different species with different strengths could cover each other's weaknesses. It was a compelling argument backed by solid evidence. Dr. Helen Grant spoke about culture and understanding. She had spent the past year studying council species, learning their histories, understanding their fears and hopes. She explained that the council's protective instinct came from good intentions, species that had survived catastrophic wars wanting to prevent others from experiencing the same. But she argued that you could not protect people from life itself. Growth required risk. Progress required mistakes. The goal should be guiding species through challenges, not preventing them from facing challenges at all. The assembly lasted 2 weeks. At the end, they voted on a series of reforms. Not everything humanity wanted, but significant changes nonetheless. The technological ceiling was raised for species that demonstrated stable governance. Protectorate status would be reviewed every 10 years instead of being permanent. Independent species could maintain military forces for self-defense. Research into advanced technologies would be monitored, but not automatically restricted. It was a compromise. Not perfect, but progress. 5 years passed. Earth's influence on galactic civilization grew steadily. Human ships explored regions the Council had never bothered with. They found 3 new intelligent species. Instead of demanding these species join the Council, humans opened diplomatic relations, offered technology sharing, suggested they might want to participate in the Galactic Assembly when ready. No demands, no ultimatums, just invitations. 2 of the 3 species accepted. The third chose isolation, and humanity respected that choice. Freedom meant the freedom to say no. Commander Brandon Cole commanded the ESS Discovery on one of these exploration missions. His crew was thoroughly mixed now. Humans and Velnar and Karathi and 3 other species. They worked together seamlessly. Brandon often reflected on how quickly this had become normal. 5 years ago, first contact had been an alien fleet demanding surrender. Now he had lunch with a Velnar engineer and argued about engine efficiency with a Karathi pilot. The galaxy had changed. Or maybe humanity had changed the galaxy. Probably both. Back on Earth, Casey Moore had left military service to become a diplomat. He traveled to protectorate worlds, helping them prepare petitions for independence, teaching them about negotiation and standing firm on principles. He found the work more satisfying than his brief fame. These species looked at him with hope. The human who said no, who showed them that the council could be challenged. Casey tried to explain it was not about challenging authority. It was about knowing your worth, about refusing to accept that others knew better than you what you needed. Simple concepts, but revolutionary for species that had spent centuries being told what to do. Admiral Morrison retired from active service after 6 years. He accepted a position training the Galactic Defense Force, teaching young officers from 24 species about strategy and tactics, about adapting to unexpected situations, about leadership and knowing when to fight and when to negotiate. His students called him the Old Wolf. Morrison liked the nickname. Wolves were pack hunters, social, loyal, effective. That was what he had tried to teach. That strength came from working together, from trusting your pack, from protecting each other. President Bennett served 2 full terms before retiring. Her successor was Greg Palmer, who had been her Secretary of Defense. Greg continued the policies of engagement and cooperation. He pushed for more technology sharing, for joint research projects, for cultural exchanges. Earth began hosting students from other species. Human students traveled to alien worlds. Understanding grew. Suspicion faded. It was not perfect. There were still conflicts, still disagreements, but they were handled through dialogue now, through negotiation. Violence became the last resort instead of the first response. Dr. Helen Grant wrote a book about the transformation of galactic civilization. She called it The Laughing Revolution. The title came from that first moment when Lieutenant Amy Foster had laughed at the Council's ultimatum. When an entire command center had erupted in laughter at the absurdity of aliens demanding surrender, Helen argued that laughter was humanity's secret weapon, not taking themselves too seriously, finding humor even in dire situations, refusing to be intimidated. The book became required reading in diplomatic schools across dozens of worlds. 10 years after the treaty, the Galactic Assembly voted to restructure completely. The Council would no longer exist as a governing body. Instead, a true federation would be formed. Every species equal. Every species with a voice. Decisions made collectively.